At this point, we've successfully mounted our knife and we found our angle and we've learned about the sharpening motion. So the next thing to go over is the formation and detection of a burr. So metal has a property called ductility, and it means that you can pull and kind of stretch it. It's how wire's made. And when you're sharpening, if I'm working on one side of the blade, I am abrading metal and I'm removing metal and just taking little pieces off as I use the stone, but I'm also taking advantage of that ductility and I'm pulling and stretching. So if I'm working on one side of the knife like this with my right hand, I'm effectively pulling and stretching metal up into what's called a wire edge or a burr and kind of pushing it over the other side. So if you can imagine both bevels coming together to form an apex, a nice little point where both bevels meet a finite point in space, that's what we're looking for sharpness, is a very small apex. So as I'm pulling that metal up and when I'm reaching the apex, I'm also pulling metal over the top and I'm creating that burr or wire edge. And because I'm working on just one side, it's always going to be kind of pushed over to the opposite side from where I'm working. So if I'm working with my right hand, when I go to check for a burr, I'm going to be checking on it here with my left hand. And what I'm going to do is just take my fingernail and run it up the flat side of the blade, just like this, and see if I can get it to catch there at the very edge. So this knife, I think we saw before, was at 19 degrees. So our strategy would be to move this out to 20 degrees here, and I'll do it on both sides. I'll lock this in place at 20. And I'm still just got a fine stone. This is one of my 800 and 1000 grit stones, so I'm not going to be very aggressive here, but I'm going to just make a few strokes with my 800 grit stone, knowing that we had pretty much removed all the marker at 19 degrees. So if I go a little bit wider, so if I'm at 19 and I go a little bit wider to 20 degrees, I'm probably pretty close to hitting that apex. So that's where I'm going to start, and I'm going to do a few little scrubbing strokes here, and then I'm going to see if I've got a burr. And I can feel a small one with my fingernail, but let me just take a slightly coarser stone, the 600 grit, and I'll do a few more strokes. And now I've got a very pronounced burr. You can probably hear it in my microphone. Okay, and so now I would want to do that, of course, down the whole length of the blade. And then I would check again for a burr. And I have one down the whole length of the blade. So now, I'll go ahead and switch out my stone on this side. Also go with I guess I was using the 400 grit by accident. I'll use the 400 grit here as well. And I have it, you can probably hear that again. An excellent burr there. So now what I've done is I've worked on one side and I've pulled and abraded and stretched the metal until it's made a burr and it's come up over the edge of the opposite side. Then I've gone back to the other side, I've taken that burr and pushed it back, and I've abraded metal, so now I have a burr like this. So this is, at that point then I can go ahead and switch to a higher grit stone and start doing my alternating strokes. And again, this is just a down and forward stroke, and it's very light pressure. I'm really just letting the weight of the stones do the work. And now we've already got a very sharp knife. And that is really the key that I think most people miss when they are sharpening, is just that initial formation of a burr, from one side into the other. And technically, in theory, you don't really have to get a burr. You have to just have some way of knowing that your two bevels come together and intersect at an apex. But because we don't have really the greatest magnification to be able to see that, there's really no way to detect that other than, well, it kind of feels sharp, but that's not really empirical either. So creating and detecting a burr is a very empirical way of knowing that your bevels come together at an apex, and that is just crucial for having a sharp knife.